I went downstairs for a pair of $7 cleats. I came back up with the knowledge that my husband was planning to kill me. My son Owen had a championship game that afternoon. He was 11, all knees and elbows, and he'd been sleeping in his jersey for 2 nights. That morning, he tore through the house looking for his cleats, the ones with the neon green stripes that he swore made him run faster. I told him I'd find them. I told him to go wait in the car with his juice box and his nerves. I had no idea I was about to walk into the one room in my own home I'd been quietly, carefully, systematically trained to avoid. James, my husband of 14 years, had rules about the basement. He didn't call them rules, of course. He called them boundaries, preferences. He was good at that. He could make a cage sound like a courtesy. The basement was his workshop, he said, his space to decompress. Tools, projects, half-finished furniture he'd been meaning to get to since we moved in. He told me it was dangerous down there. Exposed wiring, rusty nails, a beam he'd been meaning to replace. He said it the way you'd tell someone you love to buckle their seatbelt. Concern, care. And I believed him. I believed him for over a decade. Because that's what marriage does, doesn't it? It teaches you which doors are yours to open and which ones belong to someone else. And I wanted to be a good wife. I wanted to be the kind of woman who respected her husband's space. Before we go any further, if you've ever found something you weren't supposed to see, something that made the floor drop out from under you, I need you to know you're not watching this alone. Every woman who's ever been told she's imagining things, every person who's been made to feel crazy for noticing what was right in front of them, you're in the right place. Like this video, subscribe, and let's walk through this fire together. Because around here, we don't just survive it, we understand it. That morning, Owen's cleats weren't in the mudroom. They weren't in his closet, or under his bed, or in the trunk of my car. And then I remembered. James had cleaned out the garage the weekend before. He'd carried boxes down to the basement, muttering about clutter, about how we needed more storage. The cleats, he'd said, were in one of those boxes. He'd meant to bring them back up. He'd forgotten. I stood at the top of the basement stairs for a long moment, my hand on the doorknob. The house was quiet. James was already at work. He'd kissed my forehead that morning, his lips warm, his coffee mug leaving a ring on the counter. He'd asked what time Owen's game was. He'd said he'd try to make it. I can still feel the ghost of that kiss on my skin. I opened the door. The stairs creaked under my weight, which wasn't surprising. They were old, and I'd been down there maybe 4 times in 14 years. James always had a reason. Let me grab that for you. I'll check. No, don't come down, it's a mess. Stay up there, sweetheart, I'll bring it up. And I always let him. The basement smelled like damp concrete and sawdust and something else. Something that caught at the back of my throat. I pulled the chain for the overhead light and the bulb flickered on, throwing long shadows across cardboard boxes and power tools and a workbench that looked like it had never been used. Dust on everything, thick and gray. Except for one corner. One corner was clean. The boxes were stacked against the far wall. Moving boxes, the kind you buy at a hardware store. Some were labeled in James's handwriting. Christmas, tax returns, Amelia's books. But there was one box that wasn't labeled at all. It was tucked behind the water heater, and it wasn't dusty. Someone had been handling it. Recently. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I was a wife looking for her son's soccer cleats, not a detective. But my hands were already moving. I pulled the box out. I opened the flaps. And there it was. Not the cleats, something else. A cell phone I'd never seen before. A stack of photographs, printed, glossy, the kind you hold in your hands. A folded document with a logo I recognized, the life insurance company we'd signed with 3 months ago, when James had sat me down at the kitchen table and said he wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of if anything ever happened to him. He'd been so tender that night. He'd held my hand. The photographs were of a woman. The same woman, over and over, blonde, younger than me, laughing in a restaurant, walking a dog I didn't recognize, standing in front of an apartment building I'd never seen. And the document listed my name as the insured, James as the sole beneficiary. Policy value, $850,000. But that wasn't the part that stopped my heart. It was the sticky note attached to the corner, in James's handwriting, with a date scrawled on it. The date was 6 weeks from today, and underneath the date, 3 words: accident, clean, confirmed. I don't know how long I stood there. The phone in my hand was dead, battery drained. The photographs stared up at me, and somewhere upstairs, my son was waiting for his cleats. But what I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't discover for another 48 hours, was that the phone wasn't dead. It was just turned off. And the moment I plugged it in to see what was on it, someone on the other end would know exactly what I'd found. I don't remember driving Owen to his game. I know I did it. I remember the weight of the steering wheel, the sound of his voice chattering from the back seat about formations and corner kicks, the way he said, "Mom, you're quiet," and I said, "I'm just thinking about work." But the drive itself is gone, erased. My brain had no room for anything except the box, the photographs, the sticky note. Accident, clean, confirmed. I sat in the bleachers with the other parents, a coffee cup cooling in my hands, and I watched my son run across a field of artificial turf like his life depended on it. He scored a goal in the second half. He looked up at me in the stands, searching for my face, and I smiled. I smiled so hard my cheeks ached, because that's what mothers do. We hold the world together with our smiles, while everything underneath us is splintering apart. I want to tell you about James. Not the James in that basement, the James I married. Because you need to understand how good he was at this, how thoroughly he had convinced me that I was safe. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue in 2009. I was 31, recently out of a relationship that had left me convinced I was too demanding, too emotional, too much. James was 34, steady, a project manager for a construction firm. He brought me a plate of food without being asked. He remembered that I'd mentioned I didn't like coleslaw, and he'd picked it off the burger before handing it to me. That was the thing about James. He was always watching, always cataloging. I thought it was love. The first few years were good, or what I believed was good. He was attentive in ways that made my friends jealous. He left notes on my car windshield. He planned surprise dinners. When my father died, he handled the funeral arrangements, the insurance paperwork, the relatives who needed airport pickups. He told me to rest. He said, "I've got this. I've got you." And I leaned into him so hard, I didn't notice I was losing my balance entirely. He started small, a suggestion here, a preference there. "Are you sure you want to wear that?" became, "I just think that color washes you out." "Your friend Claire seems a little dramatic," became, "I don't think Claire is good for you." And then one day, Claire was gone, and I couldn't remember whose decision that had been. He isolated me the way you'd prune a tree, one branch at a time. So carefully, I thanked him for it. When he suggested I quit my job, "You're so stressed, sweetheart. Let me take care of us," I cried with relief. When he offered to manage our finances, "You hate numbers. I'll handle everything," I handed over the passwords. By the time Owen was born, James controlled every corner of my life. My bank account, my friendships, my calendar, my basement. And here's the part I need you to hear. Not once did he yell. Not once did he hit me. He never locked me in a room or threatened me or did any of the things we're taught to recognize as abuse. He was kind. He was patient. He was so gentle, it took me 14 years to realize I was living inside a cage made entirely of velvet. The life insurance policy had been his idea. We'd been watching a documentary about a family whose breadwinner died suddenly, and James had turned to me on the couch and said, "I couldn't live with myself if something happened to me and you were left with nothing." He'd squeezed my hand. He'd looked me right in the eyes, and I'd signed the paperwork 2 days later. I thought it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me, but the policy he'd proposed was mutual. We were both covered. That's what I'd signed. That's what I remembered. The document I found in the basement was different. It was a separate policy, one I'd never seen, one that covered only me and paid out only to him. $850,000, the exact number he'd mentioned 6 months earlier when he talked about what we'd need to be comfortable if the worst happened. He'd done the math. He'd been very specific. I started going back through the years in my head, re-examining everything. The time the carbon monoxide detector malfunctioned and James insisted on replacing it himself. The hiking trip he'd planned for our anniversary, a remote trail, no cell service, just the two of us, that got canceled at the last minute because Owen got sick. The new prescription sleep medication he'd suggested I ask my doctor about because I'd been so restless lately. The way he'd started encouraging me to take baths before bed, long baths, with the door closed. And the candles he'd set out for me, unattended. Oh God, the candles. I sat in those bleachers for 2 hours, and I reconstructed my entire marriage backward through the lens of that sticky note. And every memory I'd filed under love suddenly belonged in a folder marked evidence. But I still didn't know who the woman in the photographs was. I didn't know whose apartment that was. And I didn't know that the dead phone in my purse, the one I'd taken from that box, was already broadcasting its location to a man who would do anything to get it back. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. I needed time to think, to breathe, to figure out what I was going to do with the bomb I just found in my own basement. So I did what any woman in my position would do. I called my mother. My mother, Patricia, is 72 years old and has never trusted a man in her life. She's the kind of woman who keeps a baseball bat by her front door and a file folder of every receipt she's ever been given. She raised me alone after my father left. Not the one who died, but my biological father, who walked out when I was 3 and never looked back. Patricia didn't cry about it. She just got a job at a bank, worked her way up to branch manager, and made sure I knew how to balance a checkbook and a man's promises in the same afternoon. I called her from the parking lot outside the soccer complex. Owen was at a post-game pizza party with the team. I had 2 hours. I told her everything. The box, the phone, the photographs, the sticky note, the life insurance policy, the candles, the carbon monoxide detector, the hiking trip. Every single thing I'd dismissed, every moment I'd explained away, every instinct I'd silenced because I wanted so badly to believe I was loved. She was quiet for a long time. And then she said something that made my blood go cold. Not hot, cold. She said, "Amelia, I never told you this, but when you were 6 months old, your father tried to convince me to go on a boat trip. Just the two of us, without you. He said we needed to reconnect." I found a new life insurance policy in his briefcase the night before we were supposed to leave. I packed your diaper bag and we were gone by morning. She said, "Some men don't change, baby. They just get better at hiding the paperwork." I sat in that parking lot and I realized I had been raised by a woman who knew exactly what I was dealing with. She just never told me. She'd wanted me to have a better story than hers. But the story was the same. It was exactly the same. Patricia told me not to go home until I had a plan. She said, "You don't confront a man like that without receipts. You don't show your hand. You document everything. You make copies, and you give those copies to someone who isn't you." And then she said the thing that probably saved my life. She said, "That phone you found? Don't plug it in. Not yet. If it's his, he might be able to track it. Go to a public library. Use a computer that isn't yours. And for God's sake, sweetheart, don't let him know you know." I need to pause here for a moment. Because I know some of you right now are holding your breath. I know some of you have felt this, that moment when the penny drops and you realize the person sleeping next to you is not who you thought they were. You are not alone in this room right now. There are thousands of women watching this with you, holding space for you, saying with me, "We see it too." Around here, we don't just survive it, we understand it. Subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss what happens next. Because what happens next is the part that still keeps me up at night. I didn't go to the library, not yet. I went to Claire's apartment. Claire, the friend James had told me was too dramatic. The friend I'd let drift away 5 years ago because my husband thought she was a bad influence. I found her number in an old address book I'd kept in my glove compartment, a paper one from before smartphones, when I still wrote things down because I didn't trust clouds. Claire answered on the second ring. She didn't say hello. She said, "I've been waiting for this call for 5 years." We met at her apartment across town. She looked the same, sharp, warm, furious at James, but too smart to say, "I told you so." She handed me a cup of tea and she said, "Tell me everything." And I did. Every single thing. When I finished, she didn't gasp, she didn't cry. She just nodded slowly and said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." Claire worked in digital forensics. She'd spent the last decade recovering data from destroyed hard drives, tracking financial fraud, building cases against men who thought they were smarter than the women they'd hurt. She said, "Give me the phone. I have a lab at work. I can clone it without activating it, pull every message, every photo, every location ping. If he's been talking to someone about this, and he has because men like James always need an audience, I'll find it." What Claire found on that phone, the messages, the photos, the voice memos he'd forgotten to delete, was worse than anything I'd imagined. Because the woman in the photographs wasn't just his mistress. She was his partner, his collaborator. Her name was Tessa, and she wasn't some innocent blonde who didn't know he was married. She knew everything. She'd been helping him plan the accident for months. The messages between them were casual, grotesquely casual. "Did you get the cabin deposit confirmed? I need the date so I can put in for time off. Remember, it has to look like a fall. Nothing else will pass the autopsy." And then, 3 weeks ago, "I love you. We're so close. Just be patient." The cabin. The hiking trip that got canceled. He hadn't canceled it because Owen got sick. He'd postponed it. It was rescheduled for 6 weeks from now. That date on the sticky note. A remote cabin in the mountains, no cell service, a steep trail with a 200-foot drop, and a wife who tragically, accidentally, slipped while taking in the view. I was supposed to die on that trip. And Tessa had already booked the time off work. I'm going to say something to you right now that I need you to hear. That man who kissed my forehead and made me coffee and picked coleslaw off my burger, he was not a monster hiding in the dark. He was a monster hiding in the light. And the woman helping him? She wasn't a victim. She wasn't being manipulated. She was writing him messages about which trail had the steepest drop. The North Trail, she said. Fewer hikers, more believable. That is not a mistress, that's an accomplice. And in a just world, they'd both be sitting in a courtroom right now, listening to a jury say, guilty. If you're watching this, and you've ever been made to feel crazy for trusting your gut, stop doubting yourself. Your gut knew. My gut knew. We just have to start listening before the basement door opens. Claire printed every message, every photo, every voice memo transcript. She made 3 copies, one for me, one for my mother, one for a safe deposit box at a bank that James didn't know existed. And then she looked at me and said, "Now you go home, you smile, you kiss him on the cheek, and you wait. Because you're not just going to leave him, Amelia. You're going to bury him." She didn't mean in the ground. She meant in paperwork, in evidence, in the kind of justice that doesn't make a sound until it's already won. I drove home with a folder full of evidence in my trunk and a smile on my face that I'd practiced in Claire's bathroom mirror. Owen was already home. James had picked him up from the pizza party. They were in the living room, playing video games, a bowl of popcorn between them. James looked up when I walked in and smiled. "Hey, sweetheart, how was the game?" I said, "It was great. Owen scored a goal." And inside, I was screaming. But I didn't know yet that James already knew the phone was missing, and he'd been waiting for me to make a move. I walked into that living room like nothing was wrong. I kissed my husband on the cheek. I said, "Save any popcorn for me?" I sat down on the couch next to my son, and I watched him play his video game, and I did not scream, I did not cry, I did not grab Owen and run. Because Claire had been very clear. If I ran, he'd know. If I confronted him, he'd destroy evidence and disappear. If I went to the police with nothing but a sticky note and a dead phone, they'd call it a marital dispute and send me home. No, I had to be smarter. I had to be patient. I had to be the woman he thought I was, the one who never went into the basement. But James knew something was wrong. I could feel it. He was watching me differently that night. Sideways glances, longer looks. While Owen brushed his teeth, James came up behind me in the kitchen and put his hands on my shoulders. The same hands that had written, "Accident, clean, confirmed." He said, "You seem distracted. Everything okay?" I turned around and I smiled. I said, "Just tired, long week." And then I did something I'd never done before. I looked him right in the eyes. Not at his chin, not at his shoulder, not at the floor. And I held his gaze. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to wonder what I was thinking. I wanted to watch him try to figure out if I was still the same woman who'd been avoiding the basement for 14 years. He held my gaze for a beat too long, and then he smiled, and he said, "Well, let's get you to bed early then." Let's get you to bed. The man who'd been slipping me sleep medication. The man who'd been lighting candles in a closed bathroom. Let's get you to bed. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark next to a man I no longer knew, listening to his breathing, counting the hours until morning. And somewhere around 3 a.m., I made a decision. I was not going to wait for justice to happen to him. I was going to build it, brick by brick, document by document, until there was nowhere left for him to hide. The next morning, after James left for work, I called in sick to my part-time job at the library. I dropped Owen at school, and then I went to war. My first stop was the bank. Not our bank, a different one, across town, where Patricia had opened an account in her name years ago and added me as a signatory just in case. She'd told me about it once, years ago, and I'd laughed. I'd said, "Mom, you're so paranoid." I wasn't laughing now. I walked into that bank and I opened a safety deposit box. Inside, I placed one of the 3 copies Claire had made. The photographs, the messages, the voice memo transcripts, the insurance policy. I sealed it and I handed the key to a woman I'd known since childhood, the branch manager, a friend of my mother's named Elaine, who asked no questions and simply said, "It'll be here when you need it." My second stop was the library. Not the one I worked at, the downtown branch, where the computers were public and the logins were anonymous. I spent 3 hours researching. I looked up the cabin James had mentioned. I found the trail, the North Trail, just like Tessa had said. I found the drop-off point, the emergency access roads, the nearest ranger station. I downloaded maps. I saved everything to an external drive that Claire had given me, one that was encrypted and password protected and completely invisible to anyone who didn't know it existed. My third stop was a law office. I didn't call ahead. I walked in cold, asked to speak with someone who handled family law and protective orders, and I was introduced to a woman named Sloane. Sloane was in her 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of calm that made you feel like the floor was finally solid under your feet. She listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, she pushed a box of tissues across the desk, not because I was crying, but because she said, "You will, eventually, and that's okay." I loved her for that, for not making me feel fragile.
Sloane said the words that changed everything.
"You have enough evidence to file for an emergency protective order, but if you want to make sure he never touches another woman's life again, you need more than a protective order. You need a criminal case, attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and I can help you build it." She handed me a checklist, a literal checklist. Documents to gather, dates to document, witnesses to identify. She said, "Take a week, stay safe, and don't tip him off." I walked out of that office feeling like I'd swallowed a thunderstorm. I was terrified. I was furious. I was exhausted. But for the first time in 14 years, I was not confused. The fog he'd wrapped around me, the gentle suggestions, the quiet corrections, the loving dismissals, it was lifting. And underneath it was a woman who had been paying attention all along. I just hadn't trusted myself enough to believe what I was seeing. But James knew. I'm sure of it now. That night, he came home with flowers, 24 roses. He never bought me flowers. He said, "I just felt like celebrating us." He poured me a glass of wine. He asked about my day. He was too attentive, too present. And when I went to the bathroom before dinner, I noticed that the lock on the basement door, the door I'd left slightly ajar, deliberately, as a test, was now firmly, tightly, securely closed. He was onto me, and I was running out of time. But what James didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that Tessa had secrets of her own, and she was about to make a mistake that would hand me everything I needed on a silver platter. The flowers were the signal. I knew it in my bones. James was love-bombing me, not because he felt guilty, but because he was watching me. Every kiss was a test. Every question about my day was reconnaissance. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was a man who needed to know if his plan was still intact, and I was the only variable he couldn't control. That weekend, I played my role perfectly. I went to Owen's soccer scrimmage, I made lasagna, I laughed at James's jokes, I let him put his arm around me on the couch while we watched a movie, and I did not flinch. The hardest part wasn't the pretending, it was the grief. Because somewhere underneath the terror, I was mourning a man who had never existed. The James I'd loved was a character he'd written, and that character was already dead. On Saturday, Claire called with the first crack in the wall. Tessa had made a mistake, a big one. Claire had been digging, not just into the phone, but into Tessa herself. Social media, public records, employment history, financial trails. And what she found made me almost laugh out loud in the grocery store parking lot where I'd pulled over to take the call. Tessa wasn't just James's mistress. She wasn't just his accomplice. Tessa was married. Her husband's name was Greg. He was a long-haul truck driver, gone for weeks at a time. And according to Tessa's Instagram, which she'd set to private but had forgotten to lock down before Claire's search, he had no idea his wife was planning a future with another man. There were photos of the two of them at a wedding 3 months ago. Photos of Greg holding a dog. Photos of Greg building a deck on the back of a house that Tessa and James were apparently planning to sell after I was dead. The house James had been investing in for the past year. The house I'd never seen. The house that was supposed to be their fresh start. But that wasn't the mistake. The mistake was a voicemail. Tessa had called James's burner phone, the one I'd found in the basement, 3 days before I discovered the box. And she'd said something so incriminating, so perfectly damning, that Claire had to play it for me twice before I could believe it. "James, it's me. Listen, I told Greg I'm going to visit my sister next month, so I'm clear for the cabin. I already bought the hiking boots. They're a size too big. Easier to leave prints that don't match mine. Call me when you get this. I love you. We're almost there." She bought boots a size too big, to leave prints. She'd thought about the forensic evidence. She'd planned for it. She'd researched it. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a moment of madness. This was a project, a collaboration, a business arrangement between two people who had decided that my life was worth $850,000 and a house with a deck. Claire sent me the voicemail file. I saved it in 3 places. And then I called Sloan, my attorney, from the parking lot of a Starbucks 40 minutes from my house, because I wasn't using my own phone for anything I didn't want James to find. Sloan listened to the voicemail. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Amelia, I want you to come in on Monday. Bring everything. We're going to the police. And I want you to bring your son to your mother's house before you do." That last part hit me like a truck. Bring my son to my mother's house. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It had never been just about me. Owen had been in the car that day I found the box. Owen had been sitting in the living room eating popcorn while his father smiled at him, knowing what he was planning to do to his mother. The thought of it still makes my hands shake. I went home that night, and I watched James across the dinner table. He was talking about work, about a project that was running behind schedule, about a guy named Mark who wasn't pulling his weight. He was so ordinary, so boring, so utterly, terrifyingly normal. And I sat there thinking, you were going to push me off a cliff. You were going to tell our son that his mother had an accident. You were going to let him grieve. You were going to comfort him. And then you were going to move Tessa into our house and spend my life insurance money on a new deck. Something shifted in me that night. I stopped being afraid of him. I started being curious about what he'd look like when he realized I knew. curious about what he'd say when the handcuffs clicked, curious about whether Tessa's husband Greg would be standing in the back of the courtroom with the same expression I'd worn in those bleachers. The expression of a person realizing their entire life had been a lie. I want to check in with you right now, because I know this part is heavy. I know some of you are sitting there with your heart racing, and some of you are remembering a voicemail you weren't supposed to hear, and some of you are thinking about a man who made you feel safe while he was quietly dismantling your life. I see you. I was you, and I need you to know, the fear you feel right now, it's not weakness. It's your survival instinct waking up. Don't silence it. Don't let anyone, not a husband, not a therapist, not a well-meaning friend, tell you you're overreacting. You're not. You're finally reacting appropriately. And if there's a Greg out there somewhere, a person who deserves to know what's being done behind their back, tell them. Even if it's hard, even if it's terrifying. The truth is a weapon, but only if you're brave enough to wield it. Drop a fire emoji in the comments if you're still with me, if you're ready to see this through to the end. Monday morning, I packed Owen's bag while James was in the shower. I told Owen he was going to spend a couple of days with Grandma, a special visit, a surprise. He was thrilled. He loved Patricia's house. He loved her garden, her cookie jar, the way she let him stay up late watching nature documentaries. He didn't notice that I was trembling. He didn't notice that I held him a little too tight when I hugged him goodbye. Patricia met me at the end of the driveway. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me, and I looked at her, and then she took Owen's hand and led him to her car. Before she drove away, she rolled down the window and said, "He has no idea who he's dealing with. You're my daughter. Go finish this." I drove to Sloane's office. Claire was already there, and together, the three of us walked into the police station with a folder full of messages, a voicemail about hiking boots, a life insurance policy I'd never signed, and the quiet, steady fury of a woman who had finally stopped being afraid of her own basement. But James wasn't at work that morning. He'd told his boss he was taking a personal day. And while I was walking into the police station, he was already at the cabin, checking the trail one last time, making sure everything was ready for the accident he still believed was going to happen. The police moved faster than I expected. I'd always assumed the system was slow, that it took weeks, months, years to get anyone to listen. But when you walk into a station with a forensic digital analyst, a family law attorney, and a folder full of evidence that includes a voicemail about hiking boots bought a size too big, the system moves very, very quickly. They arrested James at the cabin. He was standing on the North Trail when they found him, right at the overlook, the spot with the 200-foot drop. He had a backpack with him. Inside, they found rope, gloves, a small shovel, and a bottle of the same sleep medication he'd been encouraging me to take. The detectives told me later that he didn't look surprised. He looked inconvenienced, like he'd been caught speeding, like he'd been interrupted in the middle of a mildly annoying errand. That was James. Even at the end, he couldn't see himself as the villain. He was just a man with a plan that didn't work out. Tessa was arrested the same day, at the house with the deck. The house I'd never seen. The house that was supposed to be their fresh start. The detectives found the hiking boots in her closet, 2 sizes too big, just like she'd said. They found a journal. They found emails. They found enough evidence to charge her with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted insurance fraud, and a list of other charges that Sloane read to me over the phone while I sat in Patricia's kitchen, shaking, listening to Owen laugh in the backyard. Greg, Tessa's husband, was notified the next day. I don't know what happened between them. I don't know if he screamed or cried or sat in silence. But I know that a week later, Claire found a divorce filing in the public records. I hope he's okay. I think about him sometimes. Another person whose life was just collateral damage in someone else's story. The trial took 18 months. James accepted a plea deal. 25 years, no possibility of parole for 15. Tessa took her chances with a jury and lost. She's serving 18. I sat in that courtroom every single day. Not because I needed to see them suffer, because I needed them to see me. I needed them to look at the woman they'd planned to kill and understand that she was still here, still standing, still breathing, still the mother of the son James would now have to write letters to from a prison cell. Owen is 13 now. He's taller than me. He still plays soccer, still wears the neon green stripes even though they're too small, and he still asks about his father sometimes. Not as often as he used to, but when he does, I don't lie to him. I don't give him the fairy tale version. I sit with him in the quiet and I say, "Your father made choices that hurt people, and he's living with those choices now. But you are not his choices. You're your own." And then I hold him, and I let him cry if he needs to, and we both keep going. Patricia says I've become the woman she always knew I'd be. She still keeps a baseball bat by the front door, old habits, but she's softened a little. She watches Owen on weekends, and she teaches him how to garden, and she never, ever tells me I'm being dramatic. Because she knows now what she knew when I was 6 months old. Some instincts aren't paranoia. They're prophecy.
I want to leave you with something.
Not a warning, because I don't want you to live in fear. A reminder. The thing that saved me wasn't strength. It wasn't luck. It was attention. I paid attention. I finally stopped dismissing the little things, the closed door, the canceled trip, the candles in the bathroom. And when I found something I wasn't supposed to see, I didn't talk myself out of believing it. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think of something you've been explaining away, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. Because these stories aren't just entertainment. They're lanterns, they're maps, they're proof that you can walk through the fire and come out the other side. Around here, we don't just survive it, we understand it, and then we let it go. The firelight is always on. I'll see you next time.